So as I mentioned, I'm with the Alliance Center. A little background information. We are a nonprofit in Denver that exists to bring people together to solve systemic problems, especially around climate change. We convene, we mobilize, we bring together our network of nonprofit organizations, for-profit businesses, government agencies, and academic institutions, as well as community members to collaboratively create sustainability-focused solutions. The Best for Colorado program is a program of the Alliance Center. We acknowledge that, a sustainable future is not possible without leadership and innovations from the private sector. This is why the Best for Colorado program serves as a hub for corporate social responsibility for Colorado businesses. It also allows companies to measure and improve their social and environmental impact, regardless of where they're at on their corporate social responsibility journey. Today will flow like this. We'll hear from David with Mayfly Outdoors for a couple of minutes, and then we'll hear from Jesse with Pairs to Perennials, and then we'll open it up for Q&A and discussion. So if you have any questions that you really want to have answered, please make sure to put them in the chat box for David and Jesse to get to later. And I'm so excited to hand this conversation of civic engagement over to our amazing speakers today. Please allow me to introduce David Drago, founder and executive chairman of Mayfly Outdoors, which is an outdoor products company whose mission is to inspire adventure. And fun fact I learned about David is that he was reappointed by the Colorado Senator Leroy Garcia Jr. Senate President to continue serving on the Colorado Economic Development Commission earlier this year. So yeah, I thought that was a fun fact that I wanted to share about you, David, because that's so cool. And then Jessie Berg is also with us today. She is the president and CEO of Pairs to Perennials, a full service garden design, installation, maintenance, irrigation, and tree care company. And what we're going to do today is we're going to start talking about civic engagement as like a broad overview focus from David, and then we'll dive into some of the specifics with Jesse. And with that, I will hand it over to you, David. So please take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. It's good to see some familiar faces on this call. As Danny said, I'm going to introduce this topic of civic engagement, and then, from a high level. And then I'm going to turn over to Jessie. She's got some very specific, really operational and strategic examples of how she runs her organization. And then hopefully at the end, we'll get some Q&A. I know that's a lot of these meetings, you get the most out of the Q&A session. So the majority of the time will be Q&A. And at the end, if you have specific questions you just want to ask us offline or want to get together outside of this meeting, we'll share our contact information and we can answer something specifically for you and your business. And with that, I will share my screen. My presentation is pretty short, and then I'll hand it over to Jesse. Okay, so if you can see my screen, Danny, I don't know if you can give me a nod or a thumbs up that you can see our logo. Okay, all right. So as Danny said, my company is Mayfly Outdoors. We're a fishing company. And we're a manufacturer. We're headquartered in Montrose, Colorado, which is on the western slope, about an hour north of Telluride. And our town's about 20,000 people, so it's pretty small. And I give you that information because civic engagement for us has been a really important topic on who we are as a business. And in a small town, you can make a big impact. And so today I want to talk to you guys, to you who are, our business leaders on really the importance of aligning your company values to your company mission. And specifically, I'm going to give you an example of two of our company values and concrete examples of how those values have directly correlated to a civic engagement project, two actually pretty big projects. And I think this topic is so important right now because it's pretty fractured out there. As we all know, we're all working from home. Our lives have been disrupted for at least the last 12 months. And I can tell you that for our business, the values of our company have been the glue that have kept us together. There's a lot of other things that have happened that we didn't like, But at the end of the day, we've really gone back to these as a business to answer the question why we do what we do, why we get involved, and I think provide some really important context to our team members and our community on our business, on the initiatives that we care about. And so with that being said, I'm going to get into one of our company values, and I'm going to show it on the screen here. So be the guide. This is all of our company values are obviously fishing themed. So if you've ever fished or been a hunter or an angler, you're typically with a guide. And a guide is someone that really totally immerses, themselves into someone else's experience. They help them along the way. They're really their leader. And for those of you who have ever, coached a kid's sports team or, been involved with anything, related to young kids, it's interesting topic because you almost get, more joy out of someone else, being successful than you yourself do. And so be the guide is really a company value that tells us, how we're going to treat each other, how we're going to treat our customers. And I think most importantly for this group is how to get involved in the community and really be their guide. And so the three words below it just give you some context. I think these are pretty concrete examples and, descriptive words. They're not some, fluffy thing, but when we show them to our employees and we really, behave this way, I think they're, they become pretty meaningful, they stick. And so this topic has also even spilled over into the kind of people that we hire, and it's pervasive. So this is a picture of a concrete trail. Our building is actually on the right. I don't know if you can see my mouse over here, but that's actually our headquarters right there. And Be the Guide has really been a significant topic in the trail system in our community, and specifically this trail. This is an example. We were able to really help the city of Montrose and the Montrose Recreation District get about a $3 million grant to build this trail. And a lot of it came from getting involved with the city, showing up to every meeting, being late and possibly staying late at every meeting, following up, helping actually write the grant, and giving the city and the community all the credit for it. So Be the Guide is a good example of how our company behavior has really spilled over into a real world civic engagement project in this trail. So this is a second company value of 5 that we have. It's called Fish Together. And as you can imagine, obviously, again, all of our themes are fishing related, but this theme has really resonated with a lot of our employees in the business to understand how to treat one another. But most importantly, I think under this topic is how to engage with the outside world, because it's just the right thing to do. So Fish Together really came out of this desire to help other people, because you don't owe them anything and they don't owe you anything. Fish Together is a topic of being together with someone just to be together. So a good example in the business is that after hours, on Thursdays and Fridays, most of the employees, will hang out for 2 or 3 hours after work sometimes. We'll have food, we'll have music. Right now it's a little bit more difficult with COVID. But the point is that people aren't rushing to just get out, right? They want to be together. And this has spilled over specifically with civic engagement with this photo. So this photo is actually taken just down the river from the other one. And these are big trucks in the river, and you're probably wondering what the heck's going on. Well, Fish Together literally has resulted in a significant river restoration project along the Uncompahgre River, which is the one that runs through our town, to literally get people outside fishing together. And so we were able to help raise some money for the city, about $1.6 million, which was pretty substantial at the time, to do this project. And this project, this picture was taken back in the fall, and the project will be completed. It's actually done now. They're actually revegetating it, and it's open to the public. And literally it came out of the idea of getting kids and families outside just to spend time with each other. Maybe getting sunburned, maybe catching a fish, but really just being together. And so I think for civic engagement, our company values really describe the type of behavior that we want to have, with each other, but most importantly outside, specifically trying to lead a better civic life, right? Being involved outside of work, thinking long-term. We call it generational thinking, which is puts a different perspective on things and really aligns with who they are as a business, right? So people can answer the question why we get involved and why we do what we do. And so I'll kind of pause there for a minute and I'll let Jessie get ready for her part of the presentation. And I think, Danny, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're going to hold off on questions till after. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, with that being said, I will pause there and I will stop talking and I will graciously hand it over to Jessie.
Thanks. Yeah, so David's introduction on policy or on values is a great segue. Share the right. You guys see my slideshow? Okay, yeah. Great. I have multiple monitors and I got really paranoid for a second that I shared the wrong screen and you were looking at like the post-Zoom meeting screen. But yeah, so David did a great introduction to really living by your values and as a business. And one of Paris Perennial's values that we talk about a lot, we have two that are pretty key to how we deal with civic engagement. And so our values that I'll talk about today are community and discovery. And so one of the key components to how Paris Perennials operates, we're a landscaping company. And a lot of what we do is about how do we engage with the broader community? How do we talk about landscaping? How do we talk about the ways in which we interact with our local environment? But then also as a company, how do I engage my employees? How do I engage my community in a way that allows for a lot of questions and a lot of openness? And so we take those values and we bring them into how we handle civic engagement, specifically with policy. So Paris Perennials is pretty involved in local policy in a couple of key ways. And a lot of that is because we're small. So the trades are historically fairly underrepresented in local policy discussions, particularly in the Denver metro area. And so I go to a lot of policy conversations, and then I also talk a lot to my staff about what is going on at the local and regional and occasionally federal policy levels. So I'm going to start with why you should care as a business about what is going on with local policies. And the biggest reason is really because your employees care. Not everything that affects my employees is going to affect me personally, but caring about what my employees care about is part of how we create a culture of sustainability and openness and being able to create community within our culture. On a straight up business level, it reduces turnover. Caring about what my employees care about means my employees stay with my company for longer, and we have almost zero turnover, which is unheard of in the seasonal industry in general, but particularly in landscaping. One of the other things that's true is as an employee or as an employer, the collection of voices makes my voice louder. So I can say, my employees think this. And when someone says, how do you know that? I can say, because I asked them. And here was the feedback that I got. And that's a hugely powerful statement to be able to say as a business owner and mean it. The flip side to that is no one believes Jeff Bezos when he says he's really proud of the culture at Amazon, right? That gets a lot of skepticism. And so I don't want to have that reaction when I say I talk to my employees because the things that I say align with what you would expect from my employees. Business voices, sad to say, but business voices are straight up stronger than individual voices in this culture, which I don't love, but I absolutely use that voice for power where I can because of that. And then the flip side to that is that it creates an internal culture that really encourages open discussion and respect. And without that consistent, thorough culture of talking about hard topics, talking about hard questions, and allowing for that space opinions, we would never be able to have good policy discussions. And then the last reason is that really more and more clients, staff, and people are choosing to support companies based on their values. There are a lot of landscaping companies that people can choose. So we're really picking things based on what values people want to purchase their dollars with. So things that we do specifically to help with civic engagement, I am pretty involved in the Associated Landscaping Contractors of Colorado, which is our local industry group, and a sustainable business advocacy group, Good Business Colorado. They're both great organizations. And occasionally I serve as the bridge between them. Good Business Colorado is working on the statewide composting initiative right now. And I called the ALCC last week and asked if they were also working on that, what their opinions were. And they were like, no, we hadn't realized it was been revived. Thanks for letting us know. We'd love to have the landscaping industry have some opinions on how statewide composting operates, help find end markets, all of those things. So literally bringing voices together that wouldn't necessarily be talking to each other otherwise. We talk about relevant policies at staff meetings. We talk about relevant policies on site. A good example is when I was asked to give an opinion on the Paid Family Leave Act that passed Colorado last year. My employees are largely seasonal, and a lot of them hold multiple jobs. They're gig economy workers, they're seasonal. So asking them what was important to them about that type of policy, how it would impact them, meant I could bring another level of that discussion that wasn't necessarily being heard. And they believe, and my staff believes me when I say I'd like to talk about this thing, because I say it all the time. So I attend policy learning sessions when I see them come through in my email. I bring opinions up. I try to ask a lot about how things will impact seasonal workers. I got an email several months ago from somebody in my network who was like, I heard this question about seasonal employees at this policy discussion. Was that you? And I was like, it was. And so I'm happy to have a reputation as the person who comes in and says, excuse me, you forgot about my staff. How is this going to affect my staff? Because the more consistently I can ask that question, the less likely my staff is going to be forgotten, because they know that I'm going to pose the question. And then the biggest thing that we did in 2020, we have started paid voting time. Colorado allows, I don't know if you are all in Colorado, but Colorado has mail-in ballots. And so we literally went through the ballot for the 2020 election during a staff meeting, and I taught my staff how to vote, where to research the candidates. We talked about the issues. And so that's how we handled that. And because it's a mail-in ballot, we could talk about the candidates, we could talk about the ballot measures, we could make sure the questions were answered, and then everybody filled out their individual ballot. So there wasn't any type of discussion of like, no, you should vote for this or that. It was really just questions, make your own decision, fill out your ballot. And we were able to do that because we have this consistent culture of let's talk about the things, let's value opinions, and let's make that work on all areas. So everyone voted on their individual ballot. They sealed them. I had 3 employees who had never voted before. And so that's actually something that we're going to make a standard part of our culture. Is every year we'll bring the ballots, we'll talk about how to vote, and make sure that people are able to do that. So a lot of that is, so how do you do this becomes the big question. So these are great ideas. How do you actually implement this kind of culture? The biggest thing is, what issues will your staff care about? My staff, like I said, is seasonal workers. They're gig economy workers. A lot of them are younger. Some of them have families. So what things affect them? And those are the issues that we talk about. We also talk about things that affect the business. Composting is a great example of that, in water rights, types of things that you would expect out of landscaping. So things that we've talked about: childcare, changes to paid leave, regulatory changes that might affect us. We also talk about how my staff can impact those issues outside of work. So we talked about voting, we've done volunteer projects, we've talked about letter writing. So I bring those things in fairly regularly. And then the big question is why does it matter? As an employer, I have more time to think about policy, right? I'm not super involved in the day-to-day operations of my business. And we did that intentionally so that I would have time to be able to keep track of what's going on, to be able to be involved in local industry groups, to be able to be involved in these policy discussions. And so part of that trade-off is that I have a responsibility to bring that information back to them and make sure that we're making decisions as a company that is in line with what my employees value. And then questions about policy creates better policy. The more I ask, how will this impact seasonal workers? The more we think about seasonal workers when we create policy, particularly in Colorado, where a huge percentage of our employees are seasonal workers. Some of them, the ski industry is famous for having workers that are ski industry instructors in the winter, rafting instructors in the summer, and they float back and forth. And so how do you make sure that everybody is included in these conversations? If you have employees who aren't bought in or who don't understand, how is it going to impact your work or home life? How will this actually change your life? If we're offering paid leave, how will that impact what employees can do? And then the biggest piece about that is, how do you facilitate these kinds of conversations? Everybody knows you don't talk about politics at work. And so the real trick there is you focus on questions, not opinions. What don't you understand? What is the question that you have? And making sure you're creating space for quiet staff. So we have these conversations both in bigger staff meetings, but I also show up on job sites and chit chat with people while they're waiting. So I'm making time to create relationships with staff, but also making sure that we can have these one-on-one conversations as well, where I'm getting opinions of both my loud staff, who are great at offering opinions, and my more quiet staff, who typically won't offer an opinion unless I straight up say, hey, what do you think about this? What are your questions? Everybody has an opinion. So how do you create that discussion in a way that values everybody? So we do this through culture, right? Our culture in general is a very open culture where we can do questions. We have another example of a thing we do is at the end of every season, we have what's called airing of the grievances, where we sit down at the end of the season and we talk about everything that somebody wishes would be better. And everything goes on the list, just straight up. There's no discussion of solutions. There's no discussion of whether or not somebody is to blame for it. It's just straight up, what do we want to change? And then we use that as what we work on in the winter and how we shape the next season. And then in the spring, we talk about, did we make a plan for everything on this grievances list? My goal for the grievances list is that the same things don't appear every year. We'll always have grievances, but I want them to change. In 2020, the very first thing on that grievances list was that I am bad at delegation and my staff wishes I was better at conveying information. Like, that was straight up the first thing. And there are not a lot of businesses that have the kind of culture where the first thing out of somebody's mouth is, hey, owner, you're doing this poorly, delegate better, give us better information. And so we very, very intentionally created that culture, and that allows us to have harder conversations in other areas as well. The other key thing that works is having a moderator. And so one of the main ways to facilitate this conversation is you take the person who has power and you put them in the position of moderator. So when we have these policy discussions, when we have the airing of the grievances, I moderate and I don't offer opinions. And so that really helps break down some of those power barriers of, I don't want to say the wrong thing because my boss is going to tell me I'm wrong. Your boss doesn't offer an opinion, and that really helps facilitate a lot of those conversations. Ways you can get involved, local advocacy groups, your industry organization, Good Business Colorado is a great one. The Alliance Center has some good options on that. So kind of whatever the local policy groups are. Mailing list, I'm on the mailing list for every single one of my state and local reps. I make noise on Twitter sometimes. I ask questions on Twitter. Earlier this year, the Colorado Secretary of State followed me on Twitter, and I was like, I ask enough questions. So those types of things, I try to be active in different things. And then creating space for my staff to learn about the issues. So I make sure that they know what's going on. Hey, I'm going to this event. Do you have any questions? Hey, does anybody want to learn about this? If we're looking at a charity project or we're doing some sort of community involvement, hey, what's going on? So talking to your staff is huge. And so yeah, with that, here is my contact information for anybody who wants it, and we can open it up for questions.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. As a reminder to our participants, this is the time if you want to come off of mute and ask questions directly to David and Jesse, that would be great. We've also got a couple of questions in the chat too, but I would love to give people the opportunity to come off mute and engage directly. Sometimes it's a little intense. All right.
I think the one thing that I want to say, I just caught the tail end of Jesse's presentation, and I just want to say thank you for being awesome to your team, and like full support for spreading the awesome to more teams.
Thank you. We work really hard on that. It's something we're working on figuring out how do we internally train that now that I have more middle management staff. So, it's very intentional.
I think Cynthia has a question, maybe.
Yeah, this is kind of for both of you. So Yellow Dog, we started researching, or we started looking at our core values about 2 years ago as part of the EOS program. I don't know if you are familiar with that, like traction and that whole sort of entrepreneurial operating system method, I guess. But yeah, that really pushed us to identify our values, which are curiosity, creativity, and community. And like you guys are saying, it's been a real game changer since then, like how values can really shape everything that we do from then on. But it's still like we're still kind of new at it. Like the values haven't really like permeated the culture as much as we would like them to. Like it's like a process. So I guess I just wanted to ask you guys, like, what has your core values journey looked like? Like, how long ago did you identify them? How long did it take to really hone in on what they were? And like, do you see those as something that changes over time? Like, do you think you'll be revisiting them, or like what has that looked like for you guys? That's kind of a big question.
Jesse, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I can start. When I started my company, we were 5 years old, and I want to say we started having values. I think we wrote them down at the end of year one, maybe at the end of year two. So it was a little bit before we really identified them. And when I started writing them down, as a solo owner, I'm the owner of my company, and when I started, it was just me. It became a lot of, I didn't write down my values until I had employees. And when I did that, it was a lot of what are my personal values that I want to bring into my business? And how am I living by those in general? So a lot of that was like the personal becoming the professional for me, which is not necessarily the experience of somebody who is starting with a larger team at the outset. So I'm really lucky in some of that because I didn't have to do any compromising on that. And then because I didn't have to do any compromise on that, I have been able to hire people into those positions. So we've instituted some things that really help with that. One is that my male staff is actually not allowed to do first round interviews, only my female staff. One of the things we vet in interviews is, can you take direction from a woman boss? And we can't evaluate that if a male staff is doing that first initial interview. So we think about culture and we think about how those values manifest all the way at that very first thing. And that came out of my staff. One of my staff has said time and time again, we need to start bringing that culture in right at that very first meeting. And so we think about it all the way through the process. So that's been something that's really helped. But a lot of it is we reevaluate we talk about our mission, we talk about our core values, we talk about how they're manifesting them every couple years. This year, because I'm really pulling myself out of the day-to-day operations and my staff is doing it, we've had a lot more of those conversations of what does that look like? And we think about them every time we have a challenge. So like David was saying, how do you make choices around what does this look like for our values? I work in an industry where the culture is often toxic at other companies. And so when we hire people with experience, it becomes about what do we think is a trainable thing? What do we think is something where we can treat it as a learning experience? And what do we think is just something that's not cohesive with our culture? And so every time we have a question come up, so it's a lot of conversations, and it's a lot of going back to those values, and a lot of looking at them as the company grows. So as we have more voices in, do we still agree that these are our values?
Yeah, Cynthia, I would say this about the values is they are not just a poster on your wall. If you look up and you go, hey, these are cool, I think you guys got to make it stick more. I mean, my experience tells me that I can't hand it out to people on a piece of paper if they don't believe it. And if I don't act like that, they think it's BS. And so it's pervasive in the sense that we created them about 3 years ago, but we revisit them every year. And if our staff goes, these are BS, then we change them. And I got to tell you, it's been a great experience, because sometimes you think you got it all figured out and you never really do. But I'll give you an example of these, is that when we could have, all of our, company, team members, in one room, right now it's kind of hard to do that, but we actually give everybody $50. And the rule is that you can't keep it. You got to give it to somebody else. And you give it to somebody else based on, are they living the company values? Who is a good example of this stuff? So someone could walk away with $1,000. And when someone walks away with $1,000, they go, wow, this actually means something. And so that's one example. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm just saying that that's more sticky, where we said, look, we actually need to do something. We can't just stick it on the poster.
Yeah, your staff will always know whether you're living your values, but the flip side to that really is it takes a couple years for culture to kind of percolate down. And so a good example of it took, no one believes me at the beginning, right? When you first hire a staff, no one believes me that I say, no, really, I want to know what your opinion is. No, really, like, tell me the things, right? Because people aren't accustomed to that. And so the more my existing staff says, no, really, you can tell Jessie she's wrong and she's not going to be mad about it. The more that they see that happen, the more they believe. So it's not just about what I say is true. It's about how do the people on site really live by them as well. And that's a very intentional, and it took really until this year, I feel like we're in a really good spot where I can start having those types of conversations. And I feel like we're able to have that culture when I'm not directly on site, and it's being carried out by my staff more than me. And that was intentional by my staff when we talked about it last season. One of our project managers was like, but how do we keep this culture going when you're not on site? And that was a question that one of my staff asked. So we had a lot of conversations.
Yeah, Cynthia, I would also add is that this is not a great example, but it's just an example, my experience. If you wanted to print and put your values on a t-shirt, would anyone care to buy it? Or is it a bunch of BS? And if you put it on a t-shirt and you go, that's cool, then you probably are on the right track with your values. Bottom line, because you're going to look at these and go, okay, and you're going to forget them. And so I think the reality is that it's important for us that we did them together, that it was a team process, that they bought in, and that they believed it just as much as I did. And I've got to tell you, we've hired some really great people, and we've had to let them go because they didn't walk the talk. It's a hard thing to do, but we've had to do that. And that's reinforced my belief in the whole process too.
Yeah. And that is a good point about the shirts. I am constantly surprised by how much branded stuff my staff wants to own. Like, can we have t-shirts? Can we have hoodies? Can we have we have a bunch of branded stuff because my staff has all asked for it and they want to wear things that say what our company is. And as a person who has had a lot of lousy bosses, I have never had that experience from a boss where I'm like, I want to wear a shirt that proclaims who my employer is when I'm not on the clock. And my staff is like, no, we want a hoodie. Can we have a second hoodie? How many things can we have?
I would just say is that it's not necessarily about actually going on a t-shirt, you know, Cynthia, but you get the idea, right? If you hear it on the radio, does it mean something?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, you got to answer that for yourself, for your team, for your business. I don't know.
Yeah, that's funny that you give is it more than what's just on the wall as an example. It's like we're in the business of signage and wall murals. And so, I don't know if you can see it in the office, but like this is our mural that has our
cool.
values on it. It was cool because it was kind of like a collaboration. Like we're designers too, so it's like the illustrator and the designer like thought, oh, like how can we like incorporate this into like part of our landscape? And it was more than just sticking them on the wall. It was like buy-in from everybody. Like how do we create this in a way that like we're reminded of it? And I bet all of us would wear a t-shirt with that on it, or just like, you know, put it somewhere where we like to see it.
I mean, a great example. I mean, you guys all remember this, but you know, Apple. I mean, think different. I mean, you saw T-shirts everywhere about this. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I see people with a Harley Davidson tattoo. I'm like, those people. I mean, those are obviously their customers, but they believe in the company's mission just as much as the employees, to the point that they get a tattoo on their arm with it, and you know they're onto something. And that's
okay. Maybe we wouldn't tattoo this on ourselves, but pretty.
I know, but that's extreme. But you know what I mean. If someone is willing to put a tattoo on their body about a company that they like, that says a lot about that company, whether or not you use their products.
Yeah.
So there's a question that came into my chat. David, this one is specifically for you. Is how much did Mayfly Outdoors spend on the grants that benefited the community?
That's a good question. We spent about $1 million of our own money. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't include, you know, staff time. And, you know, I think these are, you know, depending on the size of your business, these may be small or big numbers. I don't think that's the point. I think the point is, why do you do it? And do your employees believe, you know, why they're involved and why you're involved? I mean, the $1 million is just a number. It could have been $100, right? It's not going to change your opinion necessarily. The point is that we told our employees that we believed in it was, you know, that it was important, and we actually did it. That's the point.
Cool. Jesse, I have a question for you specifically as well. How much time did you spend going through the ballots and the blue book with your employees?
I would say that in 2020, it was a big election year, and we had some really complicated ballot measures. So it took us like 2.5 hours to get through the whole ballot. I'll see how that shifts over time in a year that's doesn't have so much going on. Particularly for the actual ballot measures are what took a lot of time. The candidates did some, but the things that took time, we're talking about what does this ballot measure actually mean, and making sure everybody understood that. So that took a long time. And then judges took a long time. So I really encourage my staff, okay, we're going to go through all of the judges. Here's where you find this information. Here are some metrics you can help decide with the thing. So we pulled up the judge grading system that's online and looked at them. And I think that is probably the piece that has the longest impact, is saying you can vote whether or not to retain a judge. And is this judge being fair? And I think that's not something we think about enough when we go through our ballots. So that'll be a thing we do every year.
Awesome. What do you do? Here's the next question for, I think, both of you. What do you do when employees don't buy in or don't care about the work you're doing. And I know, David, you touched on this just a little bit, but maybe you could expand upon it.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is how I feel about it. You don't have to believe what we believe. You just can't work here. That's what I tell people. Simple. So it is what it is, right? I mean, I buy Patagonia clothes in a lot of reasons because I know what they believe. If they have employees that don't believe what they believe, they don't work at Patagonia. Simple. So I tell them, have a nice day.
Yeah, and we operate largely on that same principle. One of the delightful overlooked things about having seasonal staff is that if you don't adhere, like most staff, they only work for us for 7 or 8 months, right? That's the season. So we're coming back, seasonal staff comes back March 1st, and then they'll be done the end of October, the middle of November. So if someone doesn't espouse those values, then we just don't ask them back. And so that tends to be, sometimes we have people who don't make it through the season, but we're pretty tolerant of giving people room to grow. And so that's really the defining characteristic is, do you believe in what we're doing enough to grow within this organization? And if the answer is no, then they don't come back the next year.
It's kind of brutal, but Danny, to your question, if I'm going to tolerate it, then those values are just completely BS.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't. I mean, and like I said, it sounds kind of brutal, but I would rather have employees that believe what I believe, that believe in each other, that aren't as talented as other people, because in the end we're gonna outperform, and that means a lot of things, right? There's a lot of details to that, but I really think that's your North Star, right? Is your values. And if you point to them and say, it's not really what I believe, then it's all just for show. You really need to actually show that you believe it. And letting people go is a part of the process, unfortunately.
And if you're doing it well, when you let someone go, no one should be surprised by that. And that's a metric that I've kind of held to, is when I have only ever had to fire one person. And when we did it, my entire staff was like, yep, saw that coming. So that's a good metric on that, is no one is surprised.
I had a question on, I think this past year specifically, and I think, we've been kind of gearing up towards it over the last couple of years, but I think a lot of other issues have gotten a lot more attention, and companies are having to address them and incorporate them into their values. So I'm curious for you guys, did you have to adjust some of your values to, address the racial inequality things that came up this year? I think in general, sexual orientation and gender preference and identification has become a much bigger thing within the last couple of years. So I'm just curious, how you guys incorporate those new things and new themes, or and how your staff and your team responds to that.
It's a great question, Diane. And I would tell you this is, we're a manufacturer. We have more women in our machine shop than most manufacturers I've ever met. And that's just the result of us hiring the best people. And because we point to the values and go, that's what we believe. And if you're really good, if you're a man or a woman, black, white, we don't care. And so as a result of probably more general, I wouldn't say general values, but ones that just basically say, be a good person, it covers it. And I'm not saying that you don't have to deal specifically with the issues that you've asked. I think if you actually live them and you're really good at them, those things are inherently part of being a good company. And I don't know if that answers your question specifically. I can only give you my experience, which is that it's resulted in hiring the very best people. The very best people just happen to be more women than men in our manufacturing, which is very unusual, but that's what's happened.
And I think it's to some extent things are industry specific, right? So I work in landscaping, a very male dominated field. I am often one of the only people in the room, coupled with the fact that I look 10 years younger than I am and I have blue hair. I stand out. I'm opinionated, I'm loud. That's how that goes. And I've certainly gotten some pushback from that in the wider things. I have never gone to an industry event where I have not in some way been targeted for sexism, misogyny, gotten a lewd comment, steal the tool manufacturer. We don't buy their tools because their sales reps have never once assumed that I have purchasing power. They exclusively talk to the men in the thing, to the point that one time I was with my husband at an event, at an expo, and I was literally standing in the steel booth, looking through a catalog, and my husband was standing outside the booth on his phone, and the sales rep was like, "Sir, do you need anything?" And he was like, my wife is in your booth looking at a catalog and owns a landscaping company. I'm a software engineer. I have baby hands. Like, don't talk to me. You know, and so we do grapple with those things. We grapple with them all the time. And that's part of why my male staff doesn't do those first round interviews, because we literally do have to filter for, can you take direction from a woman boss? I've had people show up to interviews and go, well, I'm actually interested in a $25 an hour manager position. And I'm like, great, I'm hiring for a $15 an hour rock shoveling position. So we're on a different thing. So we do deal with those in a very real way, but we haven't had to deal with them internally because we filter so hard on those things, because we're so open about them. And when we do have an issue, part of why we have this open communicative culture that I've worked really hard to build is so that when things come up, the trust is there that people will be taken seriously. And we do have issues with that. We had an incident earlier this year where a person of color on my staff casually used the N-word on site, not in a derogatory fashion, just in like a casual, like, this is a term for another human. And we had to have a conversation about that, of this wasn't derogatory, it wasn't a thing, what is the growth opportunity here, how do we talk about these issues? Because we're coming into some of these cultural clashes. Another example that we deal with is language barriers. So a lot of my staff speak Spanish as a first language. Not all of my management staff speak Spanish. And so that's something we're working towards, is at some point, are we going to be hiring people who don't speak fluent English? And if so, how do we make sure that we're ensuring that all of my admin and managerial staff speaks Spanish? How do we make sure that that's not creating this weird, funky cultural divide? Because nothing drives me nuts more than when I see in the trades, which happens a lot, the white English-speaking project manager is followed around by a brown bilingual person who translates those instructions to the primarily Spanish-speaking staff. Like, that's the most ridiculous thing. Even from a straight-up economics perspective, you're paying a whole other person to do nothing but follow somebody around and translate. Coupled with the fact that, like, that creates this artificial glass ceiling that just doesn't need to be there. So how do we break down some of those things that happen so prevalently in the trades industry? And a lot of it is just that conversation and having an open stream of communication all the time. But we work really hard to be very, very transparent about those issues because they crop up all the time. And because of that, we've done things. One of my staff was getting hassled by another vendor at a trade show, and we brought that to the attention of the vendor, and we're able to talk about that. So standing behind my staff when things do come up has been really key in making sure that happens, because it does all the time.
I am so sorry to cut off the questions and conversation. It is getting to the end of our time together. I just want to thank, all of you for attending, and so much gratitude to Jesse and David for your time and sharing your experiences with us. It's just been so great to hear from you all. And I hope you all found this as enlightening as I did.